Hello and welcome to this prologue to the first episode of the Celluloid Heroes podcast. The prologue to the prologue, actually, because the first full episode is a prologue in itself. My name is Brad Abraham. I'm a screenwriter, author, journalist, and now, I guess, podcaster. My work includes Stonehenge Apocalypse, The Pico Incident, Fresh Meat, RoboCop, Prime Directives, and numerous hours of television, primarily in Canada. I'm author of the fantasy novel Magician's Impossible, the comic book series Mixtape, and I was a longtime contributor to Dreamwatch, Fangoria, and Rue Morgue magazines. Now, I'm here to take you on a journey through the 50 years of cinema that defined my generation, Generation X. Examining the landmark films of the era, from the well-known to the obscure to the unexpected, charting a history of cinema growth over the past century, and looking forward to where it goes next. Now, every podcast has its premise and a hook. So what's this one, and why should you be listening? I like to call this a narrative nonfiction look at the cinema of Generation X, roughly between 1977 and, well, today. All of it framed through the personal experience of seeing these 50 or so films for the first time in a theater. Celluloid Heroes is a celebration of the cinema-going experience in a time when its very existence is under threat as well. Lastly, it's something of an autobiography, which will become quite apparent as we go through. Now, if you're here looking for controversy and negativity and politics, look and listen someplace else. I know the almighty algorithm rewards controversy, but I'm not going down that particular road. Does this mean this podcast may struggle to find listeners? Possibly, but my mantra in life has always been that I would rather fail for the right reasons than succeed for the wrong ones. Many of the films I will be talking about could hardly be called classics too, like Red Dawn, The Last Starfighter, RoboCop 2, The Black Hole, and Speed Racer. But these were and remain important movies to me, and they're all going to get their due here. Believe me, if I didn't love these movies, I wouldn't be spending roughly an hour recording audio and many more hours editing, mixing, and assembling each show. Also, unlike many Gen X themed podcasts, I won't just be sticking to movies of the 1980s. And who knows, the next great cinema going experience for me and for you may be just around the corner. I was 4 years old the first time I went to the movies, and I have been obsessed with them ever since. Celluloid Heroes will chart that lifelong love and journey through the past 50 years of cinema. As for what films, well, there's a lot of them. From the suburban adventures of Star Wars, E.T. the Extraterrestrial and Explorers, to the Reagan-era cinema of The Right Stuff, Blue Thunder and Red Dawn, the sunny nostalgia that isn't of Back to the Future, Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Stand By Me, the year Generation X broke big with singles, Reservoir Dogs and Dazed and Confused, the cautionary Los Angeles-centered tales of L.A. Confidential, Boogie Nights and The Limey, the last great golden era of the blockbuster with The Fellowship of the Ring, Master and Commander, and Pirates of the Caribbean, and running all the way up to the regretful ruminations of Inside Llewyn Davis, The Grand Budapest Hotel, and The Irishman. I'll be taking a deep look at the themes, makers, and cultural context of this very diverse array of films, and determine what makes them so special to filmgoers, filmmakers, and this fan in particular, as I chart my life through the movies that inspired me. Because this is also an autobiography of me, a young film fan who became a filmmaker, charting the good, the bad, and the ugly of a life in the creative arts with all of its triumphant moments and bitter defeats along the way. There are plenty of both. Celluloid Heroes is also a celebration of the movies that defined this generation, and, I hope, a stirring defense of the movie-going experience, the necessity of the shared space, and the importance of movie theaters in general to our culture at a time when their very existence is under threat. Generation X grew up in a unique period, the era of the monoculture. We came of age with MTV, the Billboard Top 40, the big three television networks, and the multiplex. The movies, in particular, were an extension of that culture, and as Gen X came of age, so too did these movies. From Star Wars to The Matrix, Dragon Slayer to The Lord of the Rings, The Right Stuff to Avatar, we can chart the story of Gen X through the movies we grew up with. This is a story that hasn't really been told this way before, and I think is more essential than ever as streaming, the internet, and younger generations receiving their content through cell phones and social media are turning away from the one thing that once brought us all together, this communal experience of going to the cinema. It's also these movies in particular. Some of them, like Star Wars, The Fellowship of the Ring, and Avatar, are well known. Some, less so, like The Limey, Inside Llewyn Davis, and Dragon Slayer. Some have had entire podcasts and books and documentaries written and produced and created about them. Some have barely earned a mention in others. But what this podcast is going to do that the others don't is place these films into the context of what was going on in Gen X culture at the time, from paranoia over World War III to the grunge revolution to the rise of the internet. I was there when these movies were released. I saw each of these movies in the theater, and all of them in some way have shaped my life into who I am now. And lastly, because after a quarter century in the writing trenches, I realized there was one story I had yet to tell, which was my own. My story is typical of many. It's a standard suburban, middle-class, small-town upbringing. There are no insurmountable tragedies, no battles with abuse or addiction. But from the moment I saw Star Wars, my life's journey was set on its path. While many tried and failed to realize their dreams, I was one of a very lucky few to actually achieve mine. In my high school yearbook, I listed filmmaker as my career goal. And 30 plus years on from that, I'm still doing what I love, and I have the movies I watched and fell in love with at the theater to thank for that. Celluloid Heroes is the story of those movies, why they were important, and why they still matter today. But that's just me talking. What about you, the listener? Well, and I'll be honest, there are no shortages of podcasts hosted by aging Gen Xers talking about the movies of their youth. Throw a rock, you'll hit a dozen at least. If I'm boring you, or if you think this isn't for you, no harm, no foul. Go off and listen to something else. Generation X, though, is kind of a forgotten generation. Sandwiched between the baby boom and the millennials, we grew up in a monoculture of MTV, Top 40 radio, 3 major TV networks, and Hollywood blockbusters. We saw the transition from analog to digital, from broadcast to the internet, but the Gen X experience is slowly being forgotten. In some cases, it feels brushed under the table as we hurtle into this third decade of the 21st century. And I think it's well past the time we take stock of where we came from, where we're going, and most importantly, what we were able to contribute to culture, the effects of which are still being felt today. But it's not just about Gen X. This podcast is about the experience of going to the movies as well. The theatrical experience has been losing ground to streaming, the internet and social media for about the last 15 years, I'd say. Some say we're at risk of the movie-going experience disappearing altogether, that everything's just going to be delivered to us through an internet cable, to our home movie, TV device, whatever you want to call it. And I think that is a shame, because when I think of the greatest movies I ever saw, my all-time favorites, it was because I saw them in the theater. It was the experience of going, along with seeing these films, that defined them for me. And we're in danger of losing these moments as we continue to huddle inside, having our content, which is such an ugly word, delivered to us and thinking it's the same as being in the theater with an audience. It sounds pretty grim, but I still have hope. And I think people elsewhere are realizing that the magic of movies is still with us, but we're going to need to fight to preserve it. But that's all in the future. For now, I will say so long and farewell until the next episode, which will be the first full one. But before I do that, I'm going to ask you something. I'm going to ask you to think of the great movies, the great stories that inspired you, moved you, and guided you. Think of Luke Skywalker staring at the binary sunset of Tatooine, wondering if he was ever going to get off that rock. Think of Elliot in E.T., gazing out his kitchen window, convinced he saw something extraterrestrial in origin. Think of John Nada at the end of the Literal Road in Los Angeles, lowering those sunglasses and realizing the enormity of the fiendish alien invaders who've stolen his country and planet. Consider the Hobbit, Frodo Baggins, and the burden he must carry all the way to Mount Doom. Consider Llewyn Davis, trying and failing to rebuild a career shattered by his best friend's suicide. And remember M. Gustav, concierge of the Grand Budapest Hotel, struggling valiantly to maintain a sense of decorum in a world gone mad. These are all stories of the underdog. The stories that moved us and shaped us, that told us in our own unique experiences not to give up. Celluloid Heroes is the story of Generation X and how we experienced the movies of the monoculture. Gen X knows what it was like to see Star Wars for the first time. We rocked out with Marty McFly. We roamed Chicago with Ferris Bueller. We heard the Terminator say, "I'll be back," for the first time. We were there for the grunge and the alt-rock explosion and the movie culture surrounding. And we lined up the night before to see Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. This is a story that hasn't been told. And the fact these experiences have largely been dismissed and outright ignored means this is an untapped audience looking for a story like the ones told in Celluloid Heroes. And if you are to be that audience, I thank you for sticking with me as I work my way through this whole podcasting thing. So again, thanks for listening to this first installment of the Celluloid Heroes podcast. Again, I'm your host, Brad Abraham. I can be found on my website, bradabraham.com, which I'm sure is a very creative title, but it is easy to find. I'm not terribly active on social media, although that will probably have to change as we move forward with this show, because it obviously needs listeners. My social media handle is @NotBradAbraham, and you'll find me at the usual places there. Next month, I guess next episode, is going to begin this journey with my true cinematic awakening. It was not Star Wars. It was not any of the movies I saw between Star Wars and this one, which I first saw in 1982 at the Ontario Place Cinesphere in Toronto, Canada. It's a movie by a filmmaker named Stanley Kubrick. You've probably heard of it. If not, I will give you a hint in this next little musical selection. I will see you next episode. Thanks for listening.